Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, January the 28th, and welcome to our commentary. I got to tell you, the first White House or Trump White House press conference of this term, obviously, he had many in this first term, but the first one was today. And I mean, obviously, you have a contrast in the in the presentation. But to me, the biggest difference was not the people or the style. To me, the biggest difference was that this was let's just say, a White House press conference or press secretary briefing or whatever the formal name is. Seemed to be that it was more traditional this time than it was before. One of the problems in the Biden White House is that the press secretary was very often having to explain policy because obviously we never heard from President Biden. So he never spoke to the press. So the lady Corinne Pierre, I think was her name. I'm trying to remember right now, but she was forced to actually have to explain policy. She would get questions about, White House positions, and she had to be looking through her little book to make sure that she was explaining the policy correctly. And that's not really the job of the press secretary. The press secretary is, as the title implies, someone who keeps people up to speed on what the president is doing. Maybe saying the president is going here, the president is going there, that kind of thing. This is what he's going to do today. This is what he's going to be proposing today. This is who he's going to be meeting with today. That kind of a briefing is more traditional than what you had during the Biden years, where you had a poor press secretary who basically had to explain the policy of the president because the president didn't speak to the media. And I think now what we have is the more traditional White House press briefing. In other words, they're not going to be as interesting for that reason because, Trump does his own talking. He doesn't need a press secretary to talk. He talks to the media practically every day. And so it's just going to be totally different. It's going to be more traditional, as they say now, in the sense that it'll be more the press secretary just briefing the reporters instead of the press secretary having to explain the Biden positions on this or this or this or that. So I thought it was kind of refreshing. And I thought it was very interesting. Now, the young woman who is the press secretary, I can't think of her name right now. I'm sorry that I just couldn't think of her name right now, but she actually comes across very well. She's a very young woman, 27 years old, I believe. Comes across very well, very confident, and I think she's going to do a great job. But the biggest change for me is that she's not going to be explaining the president's policy because he will do that on his own just about every day. I mean, every time he walks out of the White House to the helicopter or whatever. He was in the plane the other day, Air Force One, taking questions from the media. So this is the change. I think the big change is that President Trump is much more accessible and much more willing to talk to the media than President Biden. And that makes the press secretary's job completely different. I mean, that's all I can tell you. Completely different. So in a way, this new press secretary, things are not going to be as interesting because there's not going to be that much news that she's going to be breaking compared to the previous one, who constantly had to be dealing with questions about what is the president going to do and why is he doing that. This press secretary, of course, is not going to be dealing that. So for those of us who remember previous press briefings, this is going to be a lot more like that. More traditional, if I could put it that way. A couple of interesting things. I've got a post at the American Thinker today. I'm going to recommend that you check it out. It's a post about a fellow by the name of Ruy Teixeira. Now, if that name doesn't ring a bell, he was the person who once wrote or co-wrote a book called The Emerging Majority, where he basically said that Hispanics were going to make the Democrats a permanent majority. This kind of went back. This book, I think, came out at the very beginning of the Obama administration. And the idea was that the coalition that Obama had put together was going to make the Democrats a permanent majority because it included a significant percentage of Hispanics. He has gone back on that now completely. And over the last year or so, he's basically been writing articles, basically telling the Democrat Party, you're losing the middle class, you're losing the white collar, blue collar workers, and so on. So now he has a brand new article out. You can find it over at Real Clear Politics, or you can check American Thinker. I've got a link to it in my post. And he's basically saying that the Democrats have to change. And he points out three things that they have to do to change. The first one is they're going to have to realize that the border issue or illegal immigration is a big problem for them. That the country does not accept, an open border or illegal immigration in the chaotic way that we saw it under President Biden. The country just doesn't want that. And Democrats, unfortunately, couldn't explain their positions on the border. The other thing that he's talking about is many of the cultural issues, like trans issues and boys playing on girls' teams. The country just doesn't buy that. And it's not that the country wants to discriminate against somebody. It's just that they don't think that these issues are issues that they want to get behind on. Certainly, women or men playing in women's sports. I mean, that is just a loser. If you support that, the electorate is not going to support you. And the third issue, and this was extremely interesting, I thought, was the focus on attacking fossil fuels and not understanding how important fossil fuels is to the middle class, the lower middle class, people who want low gasoline prices, who want, cheap energy for their manufacturing jobs, or, for example, in the case of South Texas, Corpus Christi, a community that is significantly very Hispanic. Well, all those refineries there, I mean, most of the people who work in those refineries are Hispanics because they live in that area. So on those three things, the cultural issues, the border, and the obsession with attacking fossil fuels, the Democrat Party just is not connecting with the working class and the blue collar class and let's just say middle America. They're just not connecting. And he has an article for them telling them to change and basically take a look at that and try to come up with more practical, pragmatic solutions. And if they do, they'll be able to compete. If they don't, they'll keep losing votes. And I point out in my post that if you look at a place called Starr County, for those of you who don't live in Texas, Starr County is a huge county to the south of Texas. It borders with Mexico. Much of the county has a border with Mexico. It's between San Antonio to the west and Laredo to the east. This is a county that historically has voted Democrat. It voted for Hillary Clinton. It voted for Joe Biden the last time. This time it voted for Donald Trump 57%. Now that's a pretty big jump to go from 47 for Trump in 2020 to 57 for Trump in 2024. How did that happen? How did that county, switch in that fashion for exactly these three issues that I'm talking about today? They don't like the border chaos. They're not in tune with all this cultural values. These are primarily his Mexican-American voters who tend to be very conservative on these cultural issues. And of course, many of them work in the energy sector. So I would recommend, I hope that every Democrat reads that article because I think it really goes to the core of their problem of why they lost the middle class and the lower middle class vote, particularly the blue collar worker. Well, the big news over in the media is that Jim Acosta of CNN is no longer going to be in CNN. He is leaving the network. I guess he was offered a job or a show at midnight, but he didn't want to do it at midnight. So he's leaving CNN. And really, I think in many ways, Jim Acosta is exhibit A of what went wrong with the media. Instead of being a journalist, what he did is that he became an activist, and he became an anti-Trump activist. And he would spend the entire show beating up on Trump. And he decided that he was going to fight Trump all by himself. Well, it didn't work. It didn't work because people just say, come on, you're too obsessed with Trump. Why don't you tell us the news? And now that Trump is back for a second term after having won this election, I guess even CNN realizes that Jim Acosta doesn't really have any value. So he's moving on. He's moving on, and I have no idea where he's going to go. I wish him well. I don't know what network is going to hire him, but I wish him well. He's almost in the same situation as Jorge Ramos of Univision, who is also, he left at the end of the year, and I don't know what he's going to do, but both of these men used to be tough critics of President Trump, and, they're no longer around, which I think maybe it's an indication that the public doesn't like this one-sided attack on one politician all the time. You got to have a little bit of balance. If you're a reporter, you can have an opinion. That's okay. Particularly Jim Acosta had a show. You can have an opinion. That's okay. But, a little balance, and not just a little balance, but a little common sense, a little sanity goes a long way when you have a show like that. On this day in history, and I remember this quite well because I saw it on TV, the Challenger exploded back in 1986, January 28th, 1986. I'm having lunch. The TV is on in a restaurant, and bang, there goes the explosion. I couldn't believe it at first. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it. I said, what's going on? Well, it was my biggest fear. It had exploded. Everybody got killed. And we look back at that day right now with sadness, of course. These people were killed. There was a teacher on board. If you remember, they had the first teacher going to space, and lots of kids around the country were watching the whole thing. So it was very sad. But after that evening, or early evening, President Reagan went on TV and spoke to the country about this, and probably gave one of the greatest presidential speeches that anybody has ever delivered. Of course, it was not a political speech. It was a speech about the terrible incident and speaking to the children as well in the country. And it was the great communicator at his best. I've got a post about this on my blog today, and I've got a link to the speech. Check out that speech. It was truly Reagan at his best. And now you can certainly understand from that speech why they called him the great communicator and why he was so popular. Because he could speak to the country, not just about politics, but he could speak to a country at a time like this and be that, that father figure who held the family together during a very difficult time. Great speech, great moment, and, sad memory of this day, 36. Wow, I cannot believe that. 38? Yeah, 30. No, wait a minute. 39. We're in 1986, so that would make it 39. I'm failing on my math here. Oh my God, 39 years ago. That's even more than I thought it was. 39 years ago. The Challenger explosion. Very sad day. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.